Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to our MassRIDES ETC webinar. It's our fourth one. Thank you all very much for joining us. So as I said, it's the fourth one of the year, and today we are going to be talking all about active transportation. So we're going to be talking about walking and cycling, specifically as it relates to getting to work. It's about sort of making healthy commute decisions for our workplaces. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping elements. So we have people joining on the line, lots of folks joining in, which is great. We love to get questions and have discussion at the end of these sessions, but for the purposes of the webinar, please keep your line muted during the webinar session. You should be muted automatically, but if you're not, please make sure that you are so that we can't hear what's going on in the background. If you've got a question, just drop it into the little chat function that we have there, and we can answer that at the end of the session and have a new discussion that we need to have. If we start to hear rumblings, people eating their lunch, the MassRIDES folks are able to know exactly where you are. They're going to come around the office and have a strict word with you. So please keep the line muted. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get into things a little bit as we get along. As I mentioned, this is our fourth webinar from MassRIDES. I just want to extend a welcome from the MassRIDES team, Diane and her crew. Hopefully these faces are familiar to most of you. These are the people out there and helping you run your programs, get things underway. They are really the experts in the things that we'll be talking about today. If you have questions that come up after our session, things that you want to dig into, ideas that you want to explore a little further, certainly reach out to your MassRIDES coordinator so you can connect with them and kind of get some ideas of how you can make some of these things happen. Okay, so just to introduce myself real quick. So my name's Adam Arnold. If you've been on these webinars before, we will have met virtually in this way before. So I work for a firm called Urban Trans. We do a lot of work with MassRIDES on a whole bunch of different things, planning work, but also our webinars, stuff to really kind of share some of the knowledge that we have in terms of TDM and commute options for employers. Wanted to share that with you folks as ETCs and give you some ideas on what you can be doing. I'll put my hands up, I am a year-round cyclist, so a lot of this stuff that we'll talk about today is pretty relevant to me. I'm actually based in Toronto, so I have the pleasure of biking through the winter in snow and ice. So if anyone's got questions about how we deal with that, certainly we can chat about that afterwards as well. That presents its own challenges. But let's move on and talk about a little bit about what we're trying to do today. So our goals really today are talking about how we can make active transportation options more available and useful to your employees. What do we mean by active transportation? Primarily, we're talking about walking and cycling. So we use that active transportation phrase as a catch-all for those terms. But increasingly, it can be other things. It can be scooters. You may be starting to see scooter share programs popping up in your neighborhood. It can be using wheelchairs. It can be skating, all these different things. Really anything that's using your power as a human to get around. But primarily we'll be talking about walking and cycling today, and a lot of the lessons will really apply to all those different options. So we want to talk about the benefits that these active modes can really offer your workplace, so not just your employees, but also what that means for you as ETCs, what benefits does active transportation bring to your workplace. And then we want to talk a little bit about how you can make your workplace more friendly to active transportation. How can you encourage people to choose walking and cycling to work? What kind of things can you do to provide and support that kind of activity? Some of it's straightforward, some of them maybe some ideas you haven't thought about before, but that hopefully you can walk away from today and think, you know what, these are some good things that we could think about implementing in our workplace. So let's start, as is useful, with a little history, a little brief history of walking. Pretty straightforward. I think we have a general understanding. I think what's kind of neat about this image, though, is it shows us that what we have become as people is a lot more sedentary. So obviously, you know, we kind of evolved and we walked, we grew more beards, then we lost our beards, and we became much more sedentary. And I think that's one of the reasons that we see walking and cycling becoming more popular, because we are leading a more sedentary lifestyle. We're sitting down much more than we ever have done, and there's all the challenges and health implications of that. So thinking about, where can we find space in our day to squeeze in some exercise, some movement, walking is going to be is obviously an easy and key part of that. So hopefully this is going to inspire us not to de-evolve, but maybe think more about how we're moving around and reclaim some of that history of us as non-sedentary animals. In terms of cycling, a little bit more complicated in terms of the history. Obviously, that's not something that we naturally do. But if we look back into the 1800s, started with the first bicycle, the velocipede, which sounds like some weird insect dinosaur combination, but actually was one of the first iterations of a bike that we would now recognize. People moving around on two wheels to kind of expand their range and their speed. Later in the 1870s, we see the penny farthing emerge, the classic kind of vintage cycle. Don't see too many around these days. I have seen them on the streets. It's kind of an interesting, quirky thing to see, but it's not really something we use too much. In the 1890s, the safety bicycle emerges, and that's really what we understand now as a modern bicycle. So think including things like a drivetrain, so that obviously your chain, pneumatic wheels to make things more comfortable and convenient for moving around. And really that design hasn't changed a whole bunch. The basics are very much the same. Now obviously, we see bikes in the tens of thousands of dollars that people are using on weekends to race long distances, but the design, the general concepts are fairly similar over time. It's a very simple machine that we're moving around on. What we have seen is really a resurgence more recently in cycling. So we've seen, over a period it kind of dropped off. People weren't using bikes as frequently, but we've seen, with the increased cost of gas, more congestion, more people living in cities, really driving people to using their bikes a lot more. On top of that are those health and environmental concerns. People are thinking more about their own personal health, the health of their cities, the health of where they live, and thinking, about the bike as a more sustainable and environmentally friendly option. We know that that it is a challenge still. We have, in North America in particular, we have environments that are really focused on motorized vehicles. That challenges how some of the options that people have. People live further away from where they work, so that can be difficult. We don't do as much training as maybe we could do. So there are still barriers, but it is something that is certainly changing. If we look back to the 60s and 70s, the bike was much more popular, particularly in Europe, China, and Japan. But again, we saw that decline. And in the US and here in Canada too, it really took on that perception of being a bit of a child's toy or something that's kind of fun to do rather than a way of moving around. Even though we know, a bike's about 50 times more energy efficient than driving, more efficient than walking. But we did see that kind of fall off. But as I say, we are seeing this resurgence. We're seeing this move from it being purely a leisure activity to becoming much more utilitarian, people using it as a way of getting around. You've probably seen in your own cities where this is starting to happen. More bikes on the road, more infrastructure starting to be present. So what does that mean in the local context? So this is an interesting bit, some statistics that are from the League of American Cyclists, and it's from the Walking and Bicycling Benchmarking Project. So this is a project that's done every few years to kind of see how all the states stack up. Now, I think it's fair to say we need to add a little grain of salt to this. So if we look at where Massachusetts falls in terms of people, percentage of commuters who are walking to work, pretty good. You're about number 5 on that list. In terms of those who are biking to work, a little lower, a little further down the list at number 15. However, I think it's worth noting, who's ahead of us. There's a lot of people walking in Alaska. It's kind of an intriguing statistic to me. Possibly maybe more out of necessity, people not living as far away from where they work, that kind of thing. Similarly to those who are biking to work, a lot of those may reflect the type of urban and suburban settings that exist in those states. So this isn't something to be overly concerned about. I think there's always that opportunity to think about how we can get more people across the state cycling and walking. The one thing to note too is, of course, this reflects the state as a whole, and we know within our more urban centres we're going to see more people cycling and walking than in more rural areas. The infrastructure is often a little better. The critical mass is such that it feels more comfortable to ride. But so Massachusetts is doing pretty good, but again, there's always room for improvement. So I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of cycling and walking, both to employees and employers. I think some of the benefits that we talk about with employees are pretty straightforward when we talk about getting more exercise, more activity, whether that's biking or walking to work. I think it's fair to say having that additional exercise, it could be an additional hour of exercise if you walk or bike half an hour to work, there and back each day. That can add a whole hour of physical activity to your day. So that in itself will add and yield those positive health outcomes. The little picture on the side of the screen there kind of shows all those areas where we see health benefits. Some of those are very physical in terms of improving heart health, improving waistline, challenging sort of and supporting weight loss, dealing with back pain and other joint pain and those kind of things, building up muscle strength. Anything that's getting the blood flowing, getting you using your muscles, building that strength is going to be helpful for your overall physical health. Mental health is also really important, and I think increasingly so in the sort of the lives that we live, busy and stressful lives. So the benefits that are offered by walking and cycling to work in terms of mental health are pretty significant, just in terms of having time in the morning or the evening to have time to yourself, have some space, free time, have a relaxing experience. Usually cycling, walking, a fairly uniform kind of activity. You can switch off a little bit. So there's all kinds of benefits to cycling in terms of mental health as well. So certainly something that shouldn't be discounted. Cost savings are another benefit that can be offered. Obviously, for most people, cycling and walking is a much lower cost way to commute. Cycling has a cost to entry depending on the bike you choose, the equipment you need. That cost will vary, but generally compared to buying a car or buying transit fare, cycling is much less expensive, and walking even lower. Most of us are walking, we're not really paying to do that. We might buy a new pair of shoes once in a while, but there's really no big expense involved with that. So that can be significant too. And then time savings as well. So particularly in urban areas, and this is certainly my experience as well, cyclists can really avoid heavy traffic. You can bypass traffic that's kind of stuck. You can take different routes that are maybe more convenient and quicker, so that you're really not in that congestion. Similarly with walking, with walking often you can take a much less circuitous route. You can cross across a park, or you can walk through a neighborhood that you maybe wouldn't drive through, and really improve how long it takes you to get around. So there's definitely some benefits in terms of employees, and I'm sure there's other things that you might know if you happen to walk or bike to work yourself, things that you enjoy about that. But why should you as an employer think about that? Why is this relevant to you? Other than having a concern for your staff and thinking, I want them to be healthy, I want them to be happy. There's been a lot of research that sort of dug into some of these ideas. So what it's shown is that productivity certainly improves when more people are cycling, walking to work, up to 27% higher productivity. Obviously, it's always difficult to measure that super accurately, but it does show that upward trend. People are getting to work, they're more refreshed, they might be less stressed, they are potentially feeling healthier, they're not tired and exhausted because they've been sat in a traffic jam for an hour or squished onto transit. So that can really help people in terms of their productivity and job satisfaction too. So people feeling happy when they get to work increases if they've had a good trip into work, and generally walkers and cyclists feel that much more keenly than other commuters. That reflects into the cost element of things. So, by workers being more productive and happier, generally we see a reduce in absenteeism. For example, again, it might just be because people are happy to come to work. They are generally less sick. They are healthier. They're more active. Overall, they're less likely to, catch that cold or pick up that flu. They are more healthy, so we tend to see that those workplaces with higher rates of cycling and walking have fewer sick days. There's also potentially that cost saving in terms of the need to reduce the reduced need to provide parking. Again, that might not happen at every workplace, but if you do start to see a large proportion of your workplace walking and cycling to work, the requirement to make sure to accommodate motor vehicles is reduced. So if you're a workplace that either pays for parking, rents parking out, that's a cost of your operation, that's something that you can look at. Reducing parking spaces is a significant cost saving. And then finally, recruitment and retention, very important as well. So having that workplace that supports cycling and walking, much more appealing to millennial commuters, for example, who may not even have a car. Certainly, it makes you a much more of an employer of choice. It also improves access to your workplace. So that's not just for workplaces who are, kind of a hip, super cool workplace where you've got ping pong tables and you get to ride your bike. It's a great storage locker, but also you may have workers who are on lower wages who just don't have access to vehicles. Maybe transit connections aren't great, so cycling and walking provides access that they may not have otherwise. So again, enables you to recruit better staff and retain them within your workplace. Third big component in terms of benefits is really showcasing an environmental commitment. So again, we've talked a little bit about it. I think it's fairly well understood that obviously cycling and walking are a much more environmentally sound way of getting around than driving in a motor vehicle. They have a much lower environmental impact than other commute methods. Obviously, no emissions, much smaller kind of eco footprint than other ways of getting around. So that's really important. What that contributes to your business is that it can really add something to your corporate sustainability goals. So if you have a corporate sustainability mission, as part of the work that you do, it might be waste, it might be energy. Starting to think about the impact that people's commute has on your sustainability can be a real important component of that. And cycling and walking, getting people using that active transportation is a great way to kind of show, what we are really making a commitment to this part of our sustainability goals. There is something called the bike-friendly business, the BFB designation. That's something that is operated by the American League of Cyclists. So they will essentially certify businesses as being bike-friendly based on a whole range of different criteria. I certainly recommend, if it's something you're interested in, taking a look on their website, seeing how that applies. There may be things that you're already doing. There's likely also some small things you can do. Some of it is around infrastructure. Do you have bike racks? Some of it's around how you support people who are riding their bikes. It's becoming an increasingly popular and an important benchmark for people. So across the US, there's over 1,000 bike-friendly businesses as of this spring. Over 500,000 employees at these businesses. 30 or more Fortune 500 bike-friendly businesses are being recognized. So it's not just small local workplaces, it really is some of these larger names, larger corporations that are getting involved in this work. So it's a great way to show externally your commitment to this kind of programming. So now I've convinced you all that it's a great idea. Let's talk a little bit about how do we get started. Where do we kind of start to encourage our employees to choose these options, and how can we support them to do that? So one of the first things that I like to talk about is trip planning. So getting people to sort of think more about how are they going to get to work. Often one of the barriers we find with people is they say, well, I would bike, but it's just too far, or there's no safe route, I just don't feel comfortable. And I certainly never want to discount that, but using trip planning tools can really help address some of those initial concerns and make people a little bit more comfortable, partially by realizing that maybe their trip isn't as long as they thought it was, partially by learning that perhaps there's a really good bike route on the way, that there are opportunities that can support them in that. So we'd always suggest a couple of things. Planning that route based on abilities is important. So an ideal trip length, is about 3 to 8 miles. That's a pretty broad range, but there is a broad range of cyclists. Not everyone is training for the Tour de France and has got out and is doing 50 miles on a weekend. For a lot of people, it can, and we want to make cycling and walking to work something that is normal. It's not a huge undertaking. So it can be a shorter length. But mapping out that, understanding what that distance is from your home to your workplace can really be helpful. And then also through that, figuring out what some of those routes are. Certainly, we always recommend that people try it out. Whether walking or cycling, try it out on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. This is not the thing to do on a Monday morning when you have a really important meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning that you have to be there for. That's going to just add to your stress level. So we always recommend that people try something on an off day. Make sure they've tested out the route. You're not going to get that exact same experience, but you'll get a sense of the road, the time it takes you, and some of the challenges that you might face. The Bay State Commute program that you will have access to, formerly NewRide, that's a great resource for doing some of that route planning. So you can do route planning using Google Maps. That will plan a bike route for you. Bay State Commute has that same functionality as well, drawing on some of that information that will plan routes for you, help you get an understanding of some of the best ways to work. It might not be the same way you would drive. So it might be, we want to use a bike route. We want to take you through, a quieter neighborhood, something that feels a little more comfortable and safe for you. Obviously, you're not on a highway, that kind of thing. So certainly worth looking at that and seeing if there's an option there that works with your abilities. The other opportunity you have is to find cycling or walking buddies, which is super interesting. So if you are thinking about trying this, but you're like, I'm not really sure if I'm ready to do it, try doing it with someone. We talk a lot about carpooling and how that's something that a lot of folks within MassRIDES will do. So think about that in terms of biking and walking. Can you find someone to bike to work with to help build your confidence? Both of you tackling that route for the first time, or maybe you go with someone who's a bit more experienced to show you the way. All these things can certainly help an individual as they think about biking to work. Okay, I'm going to kind of move into something very specific now. We're talking about getting dressed. This is often one of our other sort of chief complaints of, I don't ride or I don't walk because I'm worried about getting sweaty or cold. I have a meeting. I can't possibly bike or walk to work. So I want to talk both about walking and cycling. Cycling, I think the number one thing to say is wearing lycra is not a necessity. Unless you spent your $5,000-$10,000 on your midlife crisis bike, you really don't need all this lycra gear to be suited up for that Tour de France type of ride. You can dress normally. Part of getting comfortable riding a bike to work, and one of the things we want to see more of is people just treating it normally. You don't have to have lots of expensive material. It's really just getting a few key components that can help you be comfortable as you're riding. So number one, layer up, absolutely. Get lots of different layers on if you need to. So during the winter especially, you're still going to generate heat, so you want to be able to kind of balance that so that you don't get to work too sweaty and hot. Certainly if we're talking about walking, thinking about getting comfortable shoes, but again, that's not absolutely necessary. Again, if we're doing something that's normal, just your regular shoes are fine. If you feel that you want to walk a longer distance, you might want to get shoes that are more suited for a longer walk, but you don't necessarily need all that special gear. Some things that you definitely need, something that is waterproof, and there might be pants, might be a jacket as well. There is the phrase that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. You need to be prepared. So it's fine, and this is something I will do. I've absolutely worn a suit to work on my bike during the winter, but I've got my warm jacket on, I've got a pair of waterproof pants on that make it a little more convenient. So certainly think about that. Think about choosing good gloves for the winter. This is the one thing that I will personally spend money on when I'm riding my bike, because cold hands are the absolute worst. So that is something that's worth thinking about. You can get these kind of neat lobster-looking gloves, which are kind of cool to use too. So think about those. One other piece of gear that you might want to think about using is something called a paper shower, which sounds kind of weird, but essentially you can get them from a lot of outdoor activity stores. Essentially sort of a grown-up wipe where you can get to work and you can kind of towel yourself off a little bit, get rid of any, if you feel like you're super sweaty and gross, you can just have that paper shower, and then there's also a little towel that can come with it, so that you feel much more refreshed and you don't have that concern about feeling all gross and sweaty when you get to work. This is something that we've seen in a number of workplaces or a number of communities. These two extremes of bike riding in particular. So on the one hand, we have the tweed riders. So these are a community of people who will go out, they'll dress as if they're from the late 1800s in full tweed and very fancy outfits. And on the right, we have our mammals, our middle-aged men in lycra, which again we see a lot of, people going out on the weekend and getting all their gear on and spending all that money. I think as a commuter, you fall somewhere between the middle of those. It can be realistic, it can be sensible. You don't have to have all this high-tech gear, but you do need to make some accommodations so that you're comfortable. In terms of walking, again, I'm not going to tell you guys what you should wear to walk, but some things that might be helpful. Obviously, an umbrella. Get a good one. If you know that you're walking a lot, make sure you've got one that isn't going to suddenly blow out of your hands or get destroyed, because it will always happen at the worst moment. And then a couple of other things that you may find helpful. Thinking about podcasts. If you're looking to pass the time, if you're out walking for 30 minutes, maybe passing the time downloading a podcast, listening to some stories or journalism, or you might even learn something. And then also think about activity trackers, so Fitbits and the like, so you can kind of get some motivation by seeing how many steps that you're taking. Okay. Just a little bit more on gear, because some of this stuff, it does, I think, impact how people feel about getting to work. So let's talk a little bit about bags. It's very exciting. So if you're a cyclist, rule number one, get rid of that backpack. So if you are concerned about getting to work feeling all sweaty and uncomfortable and feeling unbalanced, get rid of the backpack. Think about getting a pannier for the back of your bike. Much more efficient and easy way to carry items. You can carry more in them. It's not going to make you hot and sweaty as you're carrying it, and it's not going to kind of unbalance you. So think about that. Baskets as well. They look great on the front of a bike. They can be useful too. Just be careful not to overload them, because they can alter your balance and cause problems on the weight of the wheel. So nothing too heavy, but they can be useful for those smaller items. And then for walkers, again, all kinds of backpacks and such are out there, but you can get practical, comfortable backpacks. You don't have to look like you're going to be climbing Everest with a super high-tech, waterproof fabric backpack with all these different cords. You can get something that's practical, that really feels like you're just, commuting in a normal way. And a lot of this, when we talk to commuters and getting people thinking about this, it's trying to normalize it, trying to get them to feel comfortable that this isn't a huge endeavor. You're not having to invest money. You're not having to be changing a lot. It's really something that a lot of people can have access to. So moving on from gear, just talking about behavior a little bit, getting people feeling confident is really important as well. Again, one of the challenges that people say is that, I haven't biked since I was at school. I think I've forgotten. I'm not really sure the rules of the road. I'm really, struggling with this a little bit. So there are lots of workshops out there that you can access, that either individuals can access or can even look at bringing into the workplace, that will give tips on all kinds of things. So basic rules of the road, learning to ride for the very basic level, basic bike maintenance, things that as a cyclist you may want to know. There aren't too many workshops in the way of walking. There are a few. Again, I think there is a sense that most people, if they're just walking to work, kind of understand that a little bit. But cycling in particular presents challenges for people. So offering some workshops to support that is certainly really helpful. So the League, again, of American cyclists, they offer their smart cycling workshops. You can take a look on their website. They're offered across the US. So you just have to kind of look where they're happening and see if you can engage with them. And REI, the outdoor store, also offers a whole bunch of those workshops. They actually offer a commuter-focused event, so you can learn and learn about riding as a commuter rather than as a road racer or a mountain biker. Commute cycling is a little different. So what are the important things to know about that? So think about both as individuals using that, but also as a workplace. Are these some things that you can offer? There's also the option to go what we like to call multimodal, which is great, which is kind of linking, the idea of linking all these different commute methods together. So for some people, they feel that walking and cycling just isn't an option because they live too far away. They live way out of town. It's really not feasible for them to comfortably use those, walking or cycling as a way to get to work. However, transit remains a really strong option for a lot of people, and it's fair to say that the majority, if not all, transit rides start at some point with walking or cycling. Whether you are just walking from your house to the end of the street, or when you get to the station, you're walking from wherever the station is to your workplace. Those connections are happening already. So how can you kind of extend that and give people more access to that, make that more useful? So bikes to transit are a great connection to make. There are challenges because getting bikes on commuter rail, for example, isn't really allowed during rush hour. However, there are solutions out there. So there are a whole range now of folding bikes. The picture there is one called a Brompton, which is sort of the classic high-end folding bike. But there's all kinds of options you can get now that allow you to ride a short distance to the transit station, fold up your bike, carry it on the train, take your train trip. At the end of your journey, get off and ride to your final destination. Great way of really connecting that first and last mile, giving you more access to transit that you might not have already. As I mentioned, you can, outside of rush hour, take bikes on the commuter rail. But again, you need to obviously always check that information specifically to make sure that you are using that properly. You've probably seen bikes on buses more and more across the state. So these bike racks on the bus, there's a little image at the bottom there showing how people put them on. So these sort of fold-down racks you pull up down from the front of the bus. They usually accommodate 2 bikes. You can throw them on there, secure them, and then you can ride the bus. So again, if you have employees who say, well, I don't really want to bike all this way to work, well, can they make a connection, put their bike on a bus, and travel that way? And then finally, thinking a little bit about bike share. So in Boston, we have Blue Bikes. We'll talk a bit more about bike share later on in this presentation. The idea that you can go somewhere and just borrow a bike, rent a bike for a period, maybe half an hour. And often these are located near transit stations, so you can get to your destination, pick up a bike, ride it to where you need to go, and leave it, and rent it for that sort of 30-minute period. So again, that's something that is worth considering. In Massachusetts, you have this great program, the Park and Pedal program. So if transit isn't necessarily an option, but you are super keen to get out there and ride your bike part of the way, the Park and Pedal program is a great one. The idea that you can drive part way to work, park up for free in a free lot, and then bike the rest of the way. So not only are you getting in your exercise there and you're able to bike even if you're living a little further away from work, but potentially you're avoiding the busiest part of the commute. So for a lot of people, the busiest part is the end of their commute as they get to where everyone else is trying to get to, whether it's an office park or a downtown location. That's where it gets most busy. So being able to kind of bypass that on your bike is certainly a great opportunity and worth looking at. If you look on Bay State Commute, you'll be able to see all those locations, so you can see what options are available to you, and so you can certainly communicate that out to staff. Just worth noting, the Transportation Secretary is a big fan. She's using these programs, so they are realistic, they are very popular, and certainly a great way for employees to think about extending their commute and bringing cycling into that. A reminder that we have the Emergency Ride Home program. So walkers and cyclists are eligible for this. So, again, one of the big concerns we see is, I'm interested in cycling, I'm interested in walking, but what happens? What happens if the school calls and my kid is sick, or I get sick and I'm stuck here? So the Emergency Ride Home program is there, offers up to $100 reimbursement for one of those emergency trips, up to 4 times a year. Just a reminder, what's an emergency? Unexpected personal illness or emergency, unexpected family illness, and then things like unexpected mandatory overtime. So always remember that is an option that is available to staff, again, as a way of making it more comfortable for them to choose cycling and walking to work. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more from the employer perspective and some of the things that can be done to become a bike-friendly workplace. It doesn't just mean having a super trendy office that you put the bikes on the wall. That might be part of it. Although this picture in particular I think is interesting because it doesn't look at all convenient to get those bikes on or off around that table. But let's talk a little bit about how we can, as workplaces, become more bike friendly. One of the the biggest um, the biggest programs that we see is really around discounts and incentives. So we can look at supporting cycling in two ways. One, that we'll talk about in a second, is infrastructure. What can you physically provide to someone to make it easier to get to work? But oftentimes some of the bigger motivators are around incentivizing employees, nudging them to choose this behavior, because we know it might not be the easiest thing, it might not be their first choice, but what value can we give them for making that particular choice? So to give you a couple of examples of firms and companies of different sizes that I think is useful to share. So one of the companies I'd like to talk about is Patagonia. You might be familiar with those, as we talk about, backpacks that are made of all kinds of material that are waterproof. Patagonia are kind of the people that do that. They make the fleeces, they do all that kind of stuff for exploring the world. So they have an interest, and they are driven to encourage employees to cycle. So they have something called a Drive Less program, and they actually provide a financial monetary incentive for employees to bike or walk to work, also for carpooling and transit, but for the sake of this, we'll just talk about the cycling and walking. So they allow employees to receive up to $2 per trip, up to 2 trips a day for a cycling or walking trip. So they are physically paying their employees for choosing this behavior. Employees can earn up to $500 a year pre-tax. So they track that, as you can see, and they record that, and then employees are encouraged to take part in that. So they have about 900 employees who do that in some form or another. A large portion of them are actually cyclists who are using those programs. So certainly thinking about, can I, encourage people in that way? Can I get them to take that leap into walking or cycling by paying them a little bit to do that? Obviously, the nice thing too is that Patagonia will then track that activity. So if we talk about how do we measure the impact of these programs and showcase environmental success, this is a great way to do it. If you know people are recording their trips so that they can get paid for it, you know the kind of impact that you're having. So I also want to talk about my own company here, Urban Trans, who I work for. Now, apologies, this probably sounds a little self-serving, but I think it's useful as a workplace with a smaller set of employees. So we have about 25 employees in different locations, and we were able to access a $50 bike subsidy every month. So it's not based on the number of days that are worked. It's really just as a subsidy to say it's really important to us that the employees are cycling. This is kind of your reward, and this is there to help you with the upkeep of your bike, maintenance, those kind of things. It's very successful. We have let's see, probably about half our staff are cycling right now, and I think it's something that is very easy to implement. It's, again, something that's worth thinking about as one of those incentives. It's helped us get designated as a bike-friendly business. So again, something, if that's important, showcasing your support for cycling and walking, that might be something that you want to consider. One other thing, this is an example from the UK, which I'm actually unsurprisingly familiar with. It's called the Cycle Scheme. There are examples in other locations. This is, I think, probably the most easy to explain and understand. So this is a program that allows an employee to purchase a bike through their workplace. So they essentially are funded by their workplace to buy a bike, and then they pay a monthly rental fee back to the workplace on that bike. So they do that for a year, so they kind of pay off through their monthly paycheck what they owe back to their employer, and then at the end of the year they're able to fully buy out that bike at a significant discount. So it's been really successful in that geography, just in terms of getting people over one of those initial hurdles, which is, I don't have a bike. I mean, we do see that a lot of people saying, I just don't have a bike, or my bike is this old one that I've had for 20 years, it's in the back, I don't know what to do with it. And sometimes the perception is, a bike is expensive, and it can be. A decent commuter bike, you could be spending $500, $600, $700. So that can be a perceived barrier. So helping employees over that by maybe subsidizing or essentially loaning the money to buy that can be something that an employer can consider. And then finally, which kind of ties all these ideas together, is this concept of the parking cash out. Again, some of you may be familiar with this. This is something that in California is very prevalent and is actually mandated for employers of a certain size. So what a parking cash out does is allows the employer to offer the option to employees to either take subsidized parking, so here you get your parking space as you normally would, or we'll give you a dollar value payout if you surrender that parking. So if you say, I don't need the parking, thanks very much, the employer gives the employee a dollar value, so some money to compensate for that. That fund can then be directed as they wish. So, that money, rather than now paying for a parking space, can go towards a new bike or some walking shoes or a really great umbrella. There's all kinds of ways of doing it. It can be something that is done monthly. It can be something that is done daily. Generally requires a little bit of work just to set up that process, and is certainly something that you would want to explore in a bit more detail. But as an idea, particularly if you are currently paying for subsidizing parking, could be a great option for you as an employer. And then to go back to Bay State Commute, as well as being able to plan your bike route and find a bike buddy, we have the incentives program through Bay State Commute. So just a reminder that it's not just for carpools. All our active transportation trips that employees take can count. So if employees log those trips, they can earn rewards for what they're doing. Very straightforward. Obviously, they need to be registered. They can record their trips, and then they can start redeeming their discount vouchers and getting all their cool stuff through the Bay State Commute program. So again, certainly something worth reminding employees about. So talk a little bit more about getting people to work and getting them once they're at work. So some of the things that might be more front of mind as you think about how do I get people to work that you might have thought of already. So getting to work is the first part. And one of the key things to think about is location. Now, obviously, we're not suggesting that everybody relocates their offices, but if you are in the process of thinking of changing offices, making upgrades, changing locations, all those kind of things, it is really helpful to think about that location and how could that support more cycling and walking. How does that workplace location, how is it served by good sidewalks, bike paths, trails, those kind of things. Also worth thinking at your existing site, take a look around and thinking, well, what do I have around me? And it's not just about do I have a bike rack, a bike lane outside my office, but what is the sidewalk like? Is it in good condition? Is it well lit? Do I need to have a conversation with someone to make sure that it is accessible so that, in the middle of February and someone wants to walk home and it's 6 o'clock at night, someone doesn't feel unsafe leaving that office to walk home. So think about those a little bit. Provide some on-site information as well on routes and route planning. So it's great. Obviously, we have the Bay State Commute. You can direct people to that resource so they can plan trips. Some people are more physical. They like to have, a map they can really look at and nose around on. So provide that information where it's appropriate. If there's a bike map of your local area, maybe put some of those in a lunchroom so people can see it, put it up on the wall, maybe encourage people to mark their routes on a bike map so they can kind of see where other people are coming, they can see that it is feasible. Giving people that information is absolutely key. And then think about hosting something like a bicycle user group or a walking club that really is there for employees who are taking these modes and thinking about it and want to do more of it. So a bicycle user group is really just a group of employees who bike to work. They don't all necessarily bike to work together, but they recognize that they are all cyclists in the workplace and they can get together, share information about routes. They can work with you as an ETC to say, it would be really helpful if we had this type of infrastructure or program at the workplace and help them kind of support each other. And similarly for walkers, maybe you have people who walk together, again, sort of sharing their experiences and looking for improvements. Or maybe it's a walking club that happens at lunchtime. Groups of employees are getting together and walking together. And we'll talk about that a little more as well. Just very quickly, when you're thinking about location and talking to employees about how far or rather why they could consider walking and cycling, think about things like a walk and bike shed. It's kind of weird to say bike shed because obviously that might refer to an actual shed. What we mean is how far can someone get from their location. So this is an example of a walk shed around a T station in Boston, really saying, within a certain amount of time or distance, 400 meters, how far can I get? This is certainly something that MassRIDES can help with a little bit as well. You might want to dig into to really think about, what's feasible for people, because it's not just, well, it's a circular buffer. So you see the blue line there, it really reflects, okay, this is just 800 meters. But realistically, it might be smaller than that because of different obstacles. It might not be as convenient to walk in that way. So think about where your location is and how far people can connect from. The upside of this too is that often people don't realize that they are much closer than they are. So showing someone that actually they live in that little green spot, for example, maybe they might think about choosing that way of getting to work. Okay, once we're at work, how do we support people? Some of this, again, fairly straightforward, but worth noting. So bike storage is really important. Making sure people can safely, securely keep their bikes locked up. All different ways of doing that. It could be the basic bike racks, just bring a lock it to its outside. They could be covered, ideally, so during the bad weather, they're not getting wet, they're not getting snowed on, that kind of thing. The next step up from that is something called a bike cage, so something where someone can kind of wheel in their bike and lock it up, so it's doubly secure. Similarly with bike lockers, we see these might be similar to a cage. Sometimes a bike locker can be an individual locker, so a large storage locker that someone can wheel a bike in and lock in. So that's something that you might have access to. And then bike rooms as well. We see more and more of this, particularly with new developments. We're seeing rooms being developed, often maybe within a parking lot, where there is an enclosed, lockable room where someone can go and leave their bike. It's dry, it's secure. They're not going to be concerned about someone taking it. That's a big concern for people, so making sure that that's looked after is really important. Showers, great opportunity, to think about how do we make sure people don't feel uncomfortable and gross. If they don't want to use the paper shower that we talked about earlier, can they actually have a real shower? Sometimes your workplace will have one that people know about and they have access to. Sometimes your workplace will have one and you don't know about it. So it might be worth digging around and figuring out, there is this shower that we have, but just no one knows about it. If you don't have showers and, it's not always feasible to say, well, let's just go build one, think about, are you located close to a local gym that maybe you could have a relationship with who may be able to offer your employees access, that kind of thing. Lockers in terms of individual lockers, so not bike lockers, but lockers where someone can keep all their kit. If you are a winter cyclist, for example, even though you're dressed normally, you're probably going to come in with different layers and maybe an extra pair of shoes. And is there somewhere safe to keep that so it's not just cluttering up your desk? That can be really supportive too. And then finally, fixing kits and stations. So things happen, people's bikes break down, you get a flat. So helping people be able to fix their bikes when they're at work can be really supportive for them. Again, it can be super basic. It can just be a quick repair kit that's kept at reception that someone can grab and use if they need to. A pump that's maybe in a lunchroom or in the garage. Or you can get these really fancy standalone full-on repair kits that have a pump integrated. They have some tools. They have a stand. So that might be something you can look at too. And again, there's lots of examples of those that our outreach coordinator can kind of help point you in the right direction of. I want to very quickly show you this video of the ultimate in bike parking. So this is in Japan. You can go and park your bike. So this is kind of a little step up from probably anything you've had, but maybe just as some inspiration. So you probably won't hear the sound, but I'm just going to, hopefully you'll be able to see the video. So that's pretty impressive. Hopefully, that might inspire you a little bit. You don't have to go to those lengths to store bikes safely, but somewhere along those lines could be super interesting. It's always good to kind of see what other folks are doing around the world. It's very impressive. So moving on from the infrastructure, just thinking a little bit more about other encouragement, other things that we can do to support what's going on. So bike share, we talked about this a little bit already. For example, the blue bikes, but also there are other bike share programs we'll talk about in a second. So it might be providing access or maybe even accessing a corporate discount for some of those bike share programs. Employees can have a discounted access so they can use those bikes when they want. Or it could be smaller scale. It could be an internal bike fleet. It could be something that exists just within your workplace, your campus. Google is the famous example. This was a number of years back. They established their Google Bikes program, sort of very low tech. Pick up a bike on the campus and bike around and leave it where it is. We're seeing more and more bike share programs emerge, especially with what's called dockless technology. So rather than the blue bike style where you have a dock where you park the bike and locks it in, all the technology ends up being within the bike. So bikes end up can be anywhere. So we're seeing more of that, and it's made bike sharing a lot more accessible to smaller communities and also workplaces. So that may be something that's familiar to you. And then think about also, how do people cycle for work trips? Do you reimburse mileage for cycling? Do you say, we really appreciate that you went out to that meeting at lunchtime on your bike, you can get some mileage for that? Do you provide bikes for work travel, which is another interesting idea? There's a picture here. This is actually my little brother. He works for a Home Depot style hardware store, and they have a cargo bike where they do local deliveries of some of their products out to the community. Again, that's probably a little bit of an extreme, but think about, if you have staff that are always going, across the city, short journeys for a meeting, is that something that could be facilitated by having a couple of bikes in the office that people could use? So I want to talk a little bit more locally, as we sort of get near the end of this conversation, about some of our kind of local leaders who are doing this work. So first up, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute.
Woods Hole offers a seasonal 3-month bike loan, allowing a bike to be borrowed for the summer and used across their site. So bikes are available between April 15th and November 1st on a first-come, first-served basis. Bikes require a $40 deposit and a $20 return, and you get a helmet and a lock with that. So Woods Hole also offers covered bike storage and bike maintenance workshops to keep everyone on the go, which is fantastic. The other example here is the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and they introduced their bike share program in 2015 called Gompy's Gears. You can see a picture there of Gompy and his bike. It's available to all students and staff and faculty, so users just register for free using the app and then retrieve a bike from any of the 4 on-campus locations. Bikes can be borrowed for up to 8 hours at a time and returned to the place they were picked up from once you've finished with it. Bikes can be used to travel between campuses, around the city, or perhaps even to the train station. So a couple of really good examples there of what some local people are doing to get people moving.
One thing we find is that if people are more comfortable with cycling in general, they use a bike at lunchtime, they're going to be much more prepared to cycle longer distances or think about riding to work, and making those connections. And of course, during the course of the day, the hope is that a bike trip is removing a vehicle trip from the road. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about walking just before we wrap up and stop for questions. How do we support walking at work? It's a little less intuitive, obviously. I mean, we don't need lockers in terms of bike locks. We don't need somewhere to store our walkers. But we do want people to have access to things like showers if they need to. If they're feeling a little hot and sweaty after a long walk to work, being able to accommodate that is important. But a couple of other things to think about. So one is walking meetings. The idea of getting out, maybe walking for half an hour and having a really active meeting. This is, when we talk about kind of mental health and improving people's productivity, this is a great way of doing it. Rather than sitting around a desk or a screen, let's all get out and let's have that meeting for half an hour while we're walking around. They're great for conversations, brainstorming, problem solving. They might not be the best if there's a lot of technical information and someone needs to take notes, but for some of those more interactive conversations, walking meetings, great. The other thing is think about lunchtime walking. So maybe it's not a meeting, it's just people going out and walking at lunchtime. So how can we support that? We talked a little bit about walking clubs, but how do you identify that there are places where people can walk? Can you provide routes for people? Can you provide some guides that say, actually there's a nice walk that goes around this neighborhood. It'll take you about half an hour. A great way to get active at lunchtime. Give you some opportunity to recharge, re-energize. And then take it to the next step. Maybe you can provide some guided walks. Maybe this could be your next team building activity, getting someone to come out and give you a guided tour of your neighborhood. It could be historical, architectural, all these different things. There's plenty of organizations out there that will do that and really get people walking. And again, the idea being, if people are comfortable walking at work, they're comfortable with walking a certain distance, they're going to be more inclined to think about walking to and from work. Okay. Very quickly, as we're running out of time, let's talk about the future. Lots of things going on in this space right now. Electric bikes are certainly something that have been around for a while, but we're seeing them becoming much cheaper. The battery technology becoming better, so they are lasting longer. They're becoming lighter. They are still expensive. You're probably paying around $1,500 for a standard bike, but they're becoming more accessible. And what that's allowing is, obviously, reduces the effort for someone. It extends the range, so someone can bike further than maybe they thought they could. It opens it up to a much wider group of people. If you didn't think you were a cyclist before, now maybe you might be more inclined to do so. Downside of it, of course, they are heavy. They're heavy bikes. They're more difficult to maneuver. You reduce those health benefits as well. If you're getting motored to work, you're not really getting that same exercise. And then, of course, the charging element, and range. So you need to think about those. Similarly, the other thing that we're starting to see more of are scooters around cities. Same kind of idea, electric scooters, people moving around. Soon you won't have to walk anywhere. You'll constantly be on a wheeled vehicle of some kind. Okay, so how can MassRIDES support you with all of this? So we've talked a lot about, throughout this, the different programs that are available and things that MassRIDES can do can support you with all of those. We do have, during the course of the year, Bike to Work Day. We have Try It Days, where you can encourage people to ride their bike. We know if they try it once, they're more inclined to do it more long term. We can help with that personalized travel planning as well. Help someone plan that route, plan the best way for them to get to work and support them in that. And then we have the Clean Commute Challenge later on in the year, another great excuse to kind of get rewarded for this kind of work. Just real quick, we have Bike to Work Day from just earlier this year, some great pictures, so lots of activity going on, people getting breakfast and biking to work. And one of the great things Bike to Work Day does is just get people excited about it. They get a group of people who might not normally bike to work, they do it together, they try it once, it's not a terrible experience, they have a great time, and they think about doing it more long term. So certainly next year, if you didn't take part this year, take part next year. And then finally, this concept of complete streets, which is a whole conversation and presentation in its own right. But the idea that we are creating streets that provide safe and accessible options for travel, for walking, cycling in particular. So this is something that has been adopted by MassDOT. MassDOT supporting municipalities in creating these kind of environments, building facilities for cyclists, for pedestrians within communities across the state that are really going to make walking and cycling more friendly. So as you start to hear this phrase complete streets, maybe it comes up in your communities, think about getting involved in those conversations and recognizing that the workplace is a really important destination and should really be factored into these conversations. So with 2 minutes to go, what have we learned? Very quickly here. So I think it's fair to say we know that cycling and walking are efficient and healthy commute modes that we should certainly be encouraging our employees to do. Trying it, identifying low stress routes can really identify that. It can lead to that behavior change. So how do we break down those barriers for people? As an employer, there's lots of programs that you can think about to make your workplace cycling and walk friendly. Some big, some small, lots of different ways that you can really make yourself attractive to people who want to walk and cycle to work. We know in the future electricity, e-bikes are going to make it easier and for more people to get around. It's going to become more attractive, so we want to think about supporting that. And then finally, MassRIDES is here to help. As with all these webinars, when we talk about these options, we want to make it very clear that MassRIDES is here to help you with these programs. We want this kind of stuff to be happening, so please reach out to us so we can support you with that. Certainly, if you do have questions, email your outreach coordinator, connect with MassRIDES and ask them, and we can certainly follow up after this conversation.